Hello, everyone. I'm John Tarr, and we got Justin Tarr on here. He's my grandson. He has a
Hello.
theological degree, and him and I do lots of podcasts together on different things throughout the Bible and everything. Today we have a kind of we're going to do this a little differently. He is actually going to be interviewing me. Okay. Um, just so you know, we both write for Two Measures Foolish. You can see it under his name. You can see it next to my name and the link to it. It's got a lot of interesting articles in there, so you can go in there and check it out. And our podcasts are all listed in there too. So this is Jaws Christ Talk. Thank you for joining on this episode of Christ Talk on April 20th, 2024. So special thanks to Wingate TV, Transform You Media, Zach with Pack Channel, and Jay Stoyhan with the Disability Channel for hosting our shows. Please be sure to subscribe to our page or wherever you found us. Our shows are live, but they're also found on YouTube and on our website. So today we're going to be talking about evolution, and the sidecar to evolution is being an atheist, because there's really only two ways that life could exist on the planet or come from. And one is called evolution, and the other one is intelligent designer. Since Justin and I are both Christians, we believe that that's God, and we're of the Christian faith. So let's take it away, Justin. Would you tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then I'll talk a little bit about myself before we get into our main subject matter.
Yeah, so I'm Justin. I got a theology degree with a focus on philosophy from Grand Canyon University here in Phoenix, and I also, got a associates and minor and all that, and some certificates in the IT field, and that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. So, I'm interested in these kind of things. I think they are relevant to our culture. I think they're relevant to how people um, think of their fellow man, and then we can get into that about how evolution affects a person's relationship to society in general. But yeah, let's get talking about it. And a lot of this talk today actually is, before you start, is actually about what makes an atheist. Well, how does someone come to believe in atheism, and how exactly were you convinced? So let's start from the beginning on that. I'm just going to go ahead and lead your how-to, since that's a lot of what I want to talk about today. What what was the where did you start in your relationship as a little kid? Where did you come from? What was your background?
My background, I was raised in a Catholic family. Um,
Were they like hard Catholics, like we're going to church on like Latin Mass Catholic, or were they just sort of like, you should believe this kind of thing, and we have a lot of rosaries and such around kind of
no, they
Catholic?
were kind of hardcore Catholic in a way. My mom had married my dad, and he was basically an atheist, so he took on all the trappings of that. But he always had a lot of questions
Mm.
about God and things like that. But my mother was truly a Catholic. She was raised in a German Catholic family.
Do you think you
Um,
might have been influenced by your dad in that way, of the kind of things he would say, where you latch onto those and be like, yeah, he's got a point? You think those might
yeah,
have stayed around during your subconscious going through Catholic school?
yeah. My dad was an interesting character. He liked to ask a lot of questions about people. He liked to find out what made him tick and stuff like that. And I guess I do too, to a degree. It's different. I was rather abused in the Catholic Church, though. When I was in Catholic grade school, I was a tough kid for the teachers, Catholic teachers, to deal with. So I got beat up a lot by the Catholic nuns. I never had any sexual problems like some people do, but I had physical problems with the
Mhm.
nuns. So when I finally got out of when I got to my own age and got to think for myself and moved out of the house, I became a hardcore atheist,
Mhm.
because one of the things that was in the back of my mind always was, um, if you are a person of God, how could you treat somebody else like this, you know?
So,
But
so you really were like a classic, like you were looking at evil and questioning how could God be compatible with evil and suffering in the world, like that was a lot of your question that you were asking, which is the question a lot of people ask.
yeah, I wrote an article in our blog. It's how do you become an atheist? And I kind of
Yeah.
went through the whole thing of how it happened to me and all the things that happened. I
Mhm.
have found out as I was writing the article that most people become atheists. Yeah, probably because they were probably Christian at one time, and they
Mhm.
got abused somewhere along the way, and they jettisoned that belief. And so that was like that for me too. But it's an emotional, instead of an intellectual decision, it's an emotional decision. You know,
You
uh,
for you it was, or do you think it is always?
I think for the vast majority of the time, not always, but I think for the vast majority of the time, it's an emotional thing,
Mhm.
and it's not a well thought out process. We try to, but we reject anything that has to do with God, out of hand without really coming and listen to it. I get on Facebook, and there's a atheist group and a Christian group that goes back and forth, and I find the atheist questions and the things they bring up are not well thought out process. So I can always tell somebody that has gone through an emotional thing through either their childhood or young adult or something like that, that they then, but it happened to me, and I stayed a atheist until I was 30. So it was a real battle for me. But you know, those same questions, same things that happened to me in my life, God used them again, and this time my heart was in a different place. So I was able to accept some of the things. I got a divorce from my wife and my family in Phoenix, Arizona, and I took a trip up to uh, Oregon. And
Mhm.
I had actually photographed, I was a photographer that did weddings, and I had actually photographed the wedding for the person I went to visit in Oregon.
Mhm.
And he
That
had
was why
become
you
a
were there.
Christian. I'm sorry?
Was that why you were there in Oregon?
Yes. I was there. And it seemed like when I was driving, I had a VW bus, and I was driving, and I felt like there was something drawing me to Oregon. And I was in Illinois at this time, and I had shot his brother's wedding. And when we finished, we talked a lot about God. When him and his brother came in to pick up the wedding photographs, and he said to me, "If you're ever in Oregon, stop by." And that's what I did. And it was a real shock for him that I showed up. It was called the Little Applegate Church. And so I, I took him around the ringer because I had a lot of questions. Being an
Well,
atheist,
he really needed to take Paul to heart then when he when he was warned, always have ready to be an answer, or always ready
yeah,
to have an apologia for the hope that lies within. Like he needed to be on that, and that's a really good lesson too, because you never know when some offhanded invitation suddenly they're right there, and you better be ready to have some answers.
yeah, he was shocked. I ended up spending about a whole month at his house. Okay.
Wow. So
And
you
then
got and you just want like set up camp then.
yeah, but I had a lot of questions for him. And on the first night, we stayed up all night because I had a million questions. And then he threw this book at me, The History of Christianity. It's a very thick book written in small letters, but it goes through the whole history of Christianity. And I can't remember the author, but you can look it up. And it goes through. It's not a
Do you remember?
complimentary history.
Do you
There's a
remember?
lot of rough stuff in it, you know.
Do you remember if the author was a believer or not?
I might look it up here if we get a chance in between.
Okay.
Um, but it was, it brought up a lot of the things in the history, especially the Catholic Church, but also the very beginning. And it brought up a lot of dirty laundry from the Christian faith, you know.
Yeah,
But
there was a shortage.
that was a good thing because it made me realize that they didn't, through the Bible, they didn't try to hide anything. You know, they were going to let you see the whole thing. But it's because of our sin nature that we did a lot of these things throughout history, and we still continue to do it. The sidecar to all of this
Yeah,
was,
I actually heard that as an interesting argument in favor of the Catholic Church. They said only an institution ordained by God can be so thoroughly mismanaged for so long and still be standing.
yeah, but
It's
it wasn't
simply
just
the
a
thrust of
Catholic.
the argument.
It's not just the Catholic Church. The whole Protestant Reformation was mismanaged. Everything down the line, and that's a good term you got, mismanaged.
Yeah,
It's
but
like,
that's but you know, for example, kingdoms have risen and fallen in the same place, but for it to be a continuous institution, the Protestants are very splintered because of all the different denominations and everyone being so decentralized. But the Catholic Church has been a central authority for almost 2 millennia at this point, coming up on it in the next couple hundred years, and but that's a long time to be a continuous central authority.
right, and it's amazing. It's
For what
amazing the Catholic Church would torment when the Bible was first came out with the printing press, and they
Yep.
were trying to distribute the Bible. They got people got caught and were burned at the stake.
Imagine that
And
being burned at the stake by the church for having a Bible.
yeah,
That is so backwards. I mean, Christ spoke wisely when he said that the kingdom of heaven is going to be like a woman who puts some yeast into 2 measures of meal, the friendship offering. I mean,
yeah. Martin Luther was actually tracked down by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the one that started the mafia.
Yep,
You think about,
he actually believed that the church had been captured by Babylon, and he called it the Babylon captivity of the church. That the church was repeating the history of Israel symbolically, and that at his life that he believed that he could have been living through Revelation, and that the beast was the Catholic Church, and the woman riding on it was the actual church and the actual Pope and all that. That was some of the things that Martin Luther believed, because he was looking at the church and how bad she had gotten and how corrupt she was. So like you said, like we were saying earlier, mismanaged. Us getting in there and doing the same things we've always done.
right? There is a book. I'm a website designer and graphic artist, and when I was in school, our teacher had us read a book because we studied all about the first printing, the first things that came up, like in caves, and then eventually the new papyrus pages that were written. And there was a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization, and it's a true story about St. Patrick, they called him. And then you can see he actually came about in 440 AD, and was the fall of Rome, and how he set up scriptoriums. These are places where young monks set up and wrote, especially the Old Testament, and that's how the New Testament was saved. The Jews actually saved the Old Testament, the Torah, but the New Testament was saved by these monks in the scriptoriums. So that's all very interesting also too,
Yep.
So there's
It'd
a
be
lot
nice.
of things.
I'm sure society would have been very different, but at the end of the day, God, those manuscripts, there was plenty of them found throughout Asia Minor and Africa and the rest. We have the Targum, for example, the Aramaic translation of the scriptures. So you know, I'm sure we I'm sure we would have been able to recover a lot of it, but who knows what society would have looked like if they didn't have those documents actually there to reference. I mean, the West would have looked totally different if it would even be even like a shadow of what it is now. I
Yeah,
mean, we're
in the scriptoriums, they did come up with a lot of the original manuscripts. And there was, I think, 1,500 of these scriptoriums all over Ireland.
you know,
And
why don't we do our next talk on that? I can give us a short history lesson on the manuscript evidence of this of
yeah,
the
yeah,
Testament.
let's do that.
Fun.
Think
We can go,
about that for our next one.
yep, we can go through different Bible translations and what they rely on, and you know the pros and cons of different Bible translations, and different, you know, the critical text versus the textus receptus and all of that. Be fun.
Yeah, the historicity of this is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember, I forget who it was, but he said, what is the book of Acts? What is it missing? It's missing something very big, so that it can date when some of the Gospels in the book of Acts was written, actually.
Yeah.
So the question
Main
was,
character's death. The primary guy is talking about doesn't record his own death.
right, what was missing was the fall of the Jews being kicked out of Egypt, or kicked out of Israel.
Yeah.
The book of Acts says nothing about it. So
Well, the Bible doesn't say anything about it either.
right, because a lot of that stuff was written before it actually happened. So they didn't write about it. You know, they couldn't. They didn't know the future. So, anyways, let's dive into evolution a little bit here. And one of the things I want to say, and I'm going to come out of because evolution, oh my God, either God had to design human beings, or evolution, through the course of evolution in millions of years, life had to spring forth. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I want to say right off the bat is life has never come from non-life in any laboratory on our planet.
Well, the terminology that I found most convincing that describes that is before life was there, it was a sterile environment. Well, the same way we look at sterility for, you know, doing a lab environment, for doing surgery, or like, you know, having to be concerned about infections and stuff. It's a sterile environment. We go through great lengths to sterilize our, you know, certain foods that we want to preserve, or sterilize our tools before we make incisions and such for surgeries. This was a sterile environment. And now we're supposed to believe that from a sterile environment, where, you know, some kind of life comes. It's literally called spontaneous generation, and it's a pseudoscience they got rid of forever ago. Yet we're supposed to suspend that and allow that pseudoscience for the first life form to come out of a sterile environment. And it's just very peculiar. How did you deal with that when you were an atheist? That whole initial life, that, you know, because once you get that first life form, you can sort of, you know, run with it and come up with all kinds of theories. But getting that first life was always very peculiar to me. And I remember even asking this in school, and my teacher essentially gave me the whole, you know, we don't ask those kind of questions or twice. And he was actually a Christian theist. He believed in theistic evolution, and he still wasn't willing to give me any more of a straight answer than just sort of like, we don't ask those kind of questions.
Right. It's very interesting. If evolution, you can't be a theistic evolutionist if evolution itself did not happen.
Yeah.
One of well, as far as I was concerned, we never really thought about the very beginning. We just thought evolution, things changed over a period of time, but we didn't go back to the very first. How
So
did
it was just
life
an
come
outside out
from
of mind
non-life?
problem kind of thing?
You say that again?
So was it a problem that you just kind of considered it out of sight, out of mind? Like you never, it's like, oh, I didn't
Yes.
even think about it.
And that's what I find a lot of atheists that believe in evolution actually they jettison and try not to think about the very beginning. But you have to. You can't just say uh, microevolution turned into macroevolution. Microevolution means that things change slowly within a certain species, but macroevolution says it changes from species to species.
So
Okay,
I
and
have a
it's
question.
yes.
What do you think is your opinion now on de-evolution? The idea that things are not actually evolving towards something or toward, to better adapt, but more rather that they were more complex and that it's actually in a state of degradation, and that what we see are not gain of function, but rather losses of certain functions. And one example that I can give that's kind of gives you the flavor of it would be sickle cell anemia. You may be protected against malaria, but now your body doesn't transfer oxygen as quickly. And to build off of that, for the theistic argument, we could say that there's probably some degradations in our genome if we just look at supposed lifespans being in the hundreds, and now it's only in like the 80s to maybe 100, 120. But before, we have accounts that are supposedly having people live hundreds of years. So do you think it might be possible that we have some sort of de-evolution, or do you think it's more just like a microevolution, or maybe that they're different things entirely?
Well, we know that microevolution does happen. We can see it changing. Creatures are adapting to their environment, but macroevolution says the whole group of animals and plants and things are changing to something different. And that's not what microevolution believes. And we can see these things happening because they are adapting. But we can't see macroevolution. It doesn't show up there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read something real quick out of here. It says the origin of life. According to, let me bring this over here. According to an evolutionary prospect, life history began when the first cells arose from non-living matter through the process of chemical evolution, abiogenesis. Darwin didn't address the origins of life in his seminal work on the origins of species. However, in 1871, to a letter to his friend Joseph Hooker, Darwin speculated the first spark of life may have taken place in a warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia, phosphorus, salts, light, heat, electricity present, that the protein and compound was chemically formed, ready to undergo still more complex changes. So that's what he believed in the beginning, and he wrote about it. But when there's a thing that in here that says no soup for you. Equally problematic for chemical evolution is the lack of evidence for prebiotic soup. If life arose from chemical stew, the earliest rocks should bear the soup's chemical residue. Yet, according to the origin of life searcher Naomi Lyav in his book Biogenesis, and he said this: so far, no geological chemical evidence for the existence of prebiotic soup has been published. Indeed, the number of scientists have challenged the prebiotic soup concept, and none of it has ever proved to be true. So, first life appears, and this is the kicker. Everything that scientists find out today, the first life appears early and suddenly with complexity. So if it came out of the primordial ooze, Darwin thought it would come up as very non-complex, very simple, and it had to have come from some of the things that were going in the atmosphere, what was going on the Earth at the time. And as we know, through the history of the planet, this planet was a very different place than it is today. But even with scientists setting up perfect conditions in their laboratories, they have not been able to have life come from non-life. So that's a big problem. It's such a big problem, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes. There's an organization of scientists, over 1,000 scientists worldwide, said it's called Dissent from Darwin, and it's called the scientific dissent. These are all scientists. There's over 1,000 of them, and it says we are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwin's theory should be encouraged. Okay, and that's the part of the problem with evolution today. If you are a teacher in high school or in college that teaches and talks about evolution, you're not allowed to do any of the negative aspects, or you will lose your job. The evolutionary group, they're on the lookout for that. They don't want to have any conflict. They want to make it sound like evolution is a done deal. But if you begin to look at it deeply, you find out that it is far from a done deal. Okay?
Yeah, I once heard it characterized by Chuck Missler that evolution is the only natural science that disregards entropy. That every other natural science takes into account that order, from order we get chaos, that it's progressively becoming more and more disorderly. And
that's a good point. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
And so that's what evolution does, is it's arguing the opposite, that it's going from chaos, from random molecules all going together, and then some of them happen to eventually come together and build out some form of order from it. Now the problem with that too, though, is just like, let's say if we granted the time scale, which they don't have in the evidence empirically, if we granted the time scale that the atheists want and the evolutionists want, proteins and molecules and such, I think specifically proteins. Stephen Mayer said that the proteins of life are less likely to be formed than all the other combinations that could randomly happen. Because with carbon, there's only so many possibilities that you could have, and then most of them are hostile to life and would actually kill whatever actually formed. And then there's only, out of those, there's only a handful of, like, let's say it's like, I'm going to kind of throw out numbers because I haven't heard about it in a long time. Maybe like every 1 in like 50 is actually good for life, but those ones are actually less likely to be created. They actually, during the creation, some of them even push away from each other because of the positive and negative charges of their the way that they could even fit within a molecule. So it's more likely for if you're to just throw them into a soup, like we always hear, and then you stir the soup up and have them randomly assemble and connect and see what you have left over, it'd be more likely for them to connect to ones that are hostile to life forming would actually what's the word I'm looking for? Amiable to life, and then of the ones that are amiable to life, it doesn't even produce like a lot of the major core ones that you need to get the proportions that you would need for life to actually be. And so even if you'd have to have such a time scale, probabilities are just so minute that it gets you a longer time than even the existence of the galaxy. Like the universe that was proposed was almost 14 billion years, and that's also, if that's somehow that stuff into Earth 3 billion years ago, which means over 11 billion years of Earth being together. Then you'd also have to account for the fact that you can only have enough carbon in existence until about 4 billion years of time, because they have to do a certain number of supernovas to go through and turn all of the hydrogen into iron and carbon and the rest. And so, I mean, it's just it gets into a problem of probabilities and time scale. You have to get enough time to get those molecules because they just don't want to randomly assemble in the way that life would randomly assemble. And so that gets to part of what you wrote about how Albert Einstein, after he came up with relativity, he didn't want to accept relativity and he started trying to prove it because he found that a non-infinite past, or at least a past that led to a beginning of everything, meant they wouldn't have the time scale to do everything. And also it meant that there needed to be something at a different time that started. So
Right.
you say that you're an older person, yet you reject evolution. And normally you either get young Earth evolution or old Earth pro-evolution. So how do you that in like an older universe, old Earth, but a younger, or sorry, a non-evolutionary view? How exactly does that work for people who aren't really familiar with a older non-evolutionary view?
Yeah, there's a misconception. A lot of people think if you believe that the Earth is 13.8 billion years old, which I do, and I found that there's a huge consensus within the Christian church that believe that the universe is very old. Um, a young Earth usually believe that it's between 6 and 10,000 years old, but old Earthers believe that it's 13.8. And when
we're also doing a little bit of an injustice to the terminology, because I know there are people who believe in a young Earth and an old universe as well. So for the purposes of this discussion,
that's a good point.
And the purpose of the discussion, though, we're kind of using them colloquially as synonyms.
I knew this was a problem when I was a Christian, and I was asking God, because I knew that the science showed that the Earth was very old, the universe was very old, and a lot of people say, well, it says days in Genesis, but days always don't mean a 24-hour period. Okay, it could be a long period of time, and the thing that the universe was already here, it says God was floating upon the depth, and so it showed before the first day, the universe was already here. And they have scaled it back, and Darwin, or not Darwin, but Einstein had figured out that to go back with the universe going back to 13 point, but it brought up an interesting point that it said that the universe started at one specific point in time. Mm-hmm. And up until that point, until the 1920s, scientists believed that the universe was a steady state, meaning that the universe was always here. And now they believe that was wrong. It wasn't until the 1970s that they were able to actually, it's called the cosmological singularity, the Big Bang. So this caused Einstein to rethink his whole process, because he was an atheist, and he soon realized if the universe started at one specific point in time, who pulled the trigger? Somebody had to pull the trigger from behind it. Things just do not pop in out of nothing. And that's what he realized he had to deal with.
Yeah. And William Lane Craig really likes this argument, because his favorite argument is the Coulomb cosmological argument. Mm-hmm. And so he really likes the building off that idea of some kind of creator, whether it be personal and impersonal. And he makes a good argument for why that creator has to be personal as well. Have you heard his argument for that? Why it has to be a person?
Yeah, what he talked about, that theory which came from an Arab, actually. What was the name of it again?
Well, the Kalam cosmological argument.
Right.
Yep.
And it's very in depth, and a lot of atheists reject that because they don't sit and think about the implications behind that
Hmm.
deeply, and
Or
you
even worse,
have
they
to.
believe that nothing can produce things, like that ASU cosmologist Lawrence Krauss. I have a hard time listening to him long because of all the philosophical errors that he makes.
He is a very arrogant and nasty debater,
Mm.
and I know that there's been Christians that have had to debate him, especially William Lane Craig, and he was very, very nasty towards him.
Hmm.
But a lot of he goes out of his element. If he's talking about astronomy and things like that, he's okay. But when he starts talking about religion, he's out of his depth.
Well, he gets into religion quickly because he starts going into the metaphysics. I mean, science can only really tell you what is happening and then give you, hypotheses of models that could potentially explain their observations. But, in order to do, for example, you can argue, oh, hey, there's a beginning of the universe. But to actually discuss what could cause that universe, you have to use logic and reasoning and philosophy. And science implies a lot of philosophy, but they don't really train them to do philosophy. They train them how to make measurements and how to, how they teach them on the scientific, process and all that. But we don't really teach proper philosophy anymore. Otherwise, people as smart as Lawrence Krauss wouldn't make such foolish arguments like that nothing can create things. He has an entire chapter about how nothing actually has causal ability, as if although nothing is actually something. And so he makes an equivocation fallacy, like the most juvenile of equivocation fallacies, that somehow nothing can create things. But all he's really done is redefine nothing and then make an equivocation fallacy using the word differently in two different ways. And that's why they call philosophy the queen of science, is because you
Right.
need philosophy to do it. And you're right. Once they start getting out of their element, they and start trying to build off, like, what do their observations mean? What are the things that they're actually studying? What do they mean on a greater scale? They just fall flat on their face and start making themselves look like fools. And
Right.
it's
Do
so
you
sad.
remember?
Like, all they needed was the humility of, maybe these philosophers and theists, maybe they are a little onto something.
Yeah, I have found that atheists are very prideful people. They don't want to
Speak from
admit that
experience, right?
you've got a good argument, and debate it, talk about it, talk about the pros and cons of a particular subject. I don't know if you remember Dr. John Lennox. You and I went to
Oh yeah, I remember
uh,
John.
a conference that your dad went to, and it was packed out with all these college kids,
Mhm.
and then they had two other places where it was packed out. But I remember John Lennox talking, and he warned these college students, be careful of your professors. He gave a warning towards the professors and said they may be really smart and brilliant in their field of study, but when they start going off, like we just talked about with philosophy and things like that, be careful. They don't really know what they're talking about. They are so concerned about pushing their point along. So John Lennox was a professor of mathematics out of Cambridge in England, and we actually had a chance to listen to the whole debate, and it was really good. There was a lot of things that came, and the fact that there were so many college uh, individuals that were like in their fourth year or getting a doctorate instead, it told me that there was a big hole in their heart. They wanted to know about God. Because the name of this thing was "Has Science Proven God Wrong?" And when they came there, they realized he was pro-Christian, he was pro-God, and he was giving out different things about proof for God. That there had to be something behind this universe that had an intelligent designer. There's a thing called fine tuning in our universe. I'm going to go off task here just slightly. Fine tuning is where the laws of physics, if it goes off a little bit on either side, it goes into chaos and life cannot exist. The simple fact for that is within our not our galaxy but the solar system, we have to have a sun the size that it is. We have to have a planet, Earth, that has to be an exact distance from the sun and have water on it.
Got a small band of livable area.
Right. And we have to have a moon the size of the moon that we have, and it has to be exactly that distance from the Earth because tides flow in and flow out, and that's how life. And we have to have two supergiants, gas giants within our solar system, to act like a magnet for things that are going through our solar system, so our planet doesn't get pummeled and hit. It has been hit a few times, but not like if you look at the moon. Holy mackerel, the moon is just full of things.
The moon acts as a bit of a magnet too to help swipe away some things. And and you're absolutely right. And another one is that so those are all like different things that help us make us more stable. We need a stable temperature, so we need to be a certain band. There's a livable band, like you're saying, and we need, not a bunch of asteroids hitting us or wiping us out with mass extinction events all the time. So we need the gas giants. Another one I heard was a spiral galaxy is the only galaxy that would probably be stable enough to allow life to form on it, because other galaxies, there's a lot of gas and stuff moving around. So the stability of a spiral galaxy is what we need. But only 20% of all galaxies are spiral galaxies. So you got 80% of all of space like away from a possibility immediately, because you're only looking at spiral galaxies. And then if you're only looking at let's say out of the remaining 20, let's say only another 50% will be super conservative. Let's say only 50% of them have two gas giants, and of those 50% of them maybe have any planet whatsoever in that band that allows it not to be too hot or too cold at any given period. And once just doing 50 a couple times, you start getting really into the thousands and the tens of thousands, and very quickly into the millions for probability 1 in a 10,000, 1 in a million, and it gets really ridiculous really quickly. And we just don't have the time. We need 100 billion years or 1 trillion years in order to get to the time scale necessary. And then you can, like you were saying at the very beginning, you consider molecular bioengineering, and not just coming about by chance, and then those forming into machines like the flagellum and the rest. And it just doesn't line up in terms of the time scale. And worse on that too is the fact that the evidence, like you said, is that it just appears suddenly. It's not like a soup and we slowly get, a bunch of microbes, and then those microbes, it's like, no, we just suddenly have a whole bunch of really sophisticated things out of nowhere. We have some incredibly simple life forms, and then suddenly a fully formed brain in the next key frame, basically.
Very complex life. And that's it. A lot of people astronomers that are not believing in God, say there are trillions of stars out there, and therefore there has to be trillions of planets. But when you start doing the fine-tuning thing, you see how it begins to strip away the possibilities where life could be. You talked about Lawrence Krauss, and he was saying things popped in from nothing. He said it came from gravity. Well, gravity is not nothing. Gravity is a thing. You know.
Empty space is not nothing. Empty space is full of energy, popping in. Atoms popping in and out of this dimension.
Dark matter. So, which they don't really understand completely. It's like a black hole.
We don't even know if it actually exists.
I know.
If you take an electromagnetic universe point of view rather than a gravity controlled one, then it actually clears up a lot of the problems that we have with dark matter.
Yeah, and then they start coming up with these things. Krauss is a big one for multi-universes.
Yep.
And multi-universe, if you go off in that direction, there's absolutely no proof for that there are multiple universes on different dimensions and stuff like that.
Yep.
But that's
also, I think possibilities are also at play. So I'm what's called a substance idealist. You know how there's materialists, people who just believe that there's it's just physical world, right? And then there are people who are substance dualists, so they believe that there's the physical and then the non-physical reality, right? I'm actually, and those are substance dualists, and then there's substance monists. Like a materialist would be a substance monist would be a materialist would be like someone who only believes that there is no spiritual, there's only physical. I'm an idealist, which is the opposite of that. I don't believe that there's two different ones. I think everything is essentially ones and zeros. Everything is just information and mind and consciousness. It's all that's base reality, almost like the Matrix or a video game or something. And an interesting argument I heard is what if what with to build off the quantum idea of a probability wave, what if it's that we're actually just seeing all the possibilities that it could be, rather than actual other universes that are there and that are physically there. What if these are just possibilities in essentially the mind of God? Your article talks about Molinism and middle knowledge. What we're seeing is actually just the possibilities of all the different worlds that God could actualize in that moment for that specific particle, I guess. And now, how that has to do with evolution, I would say that's more just, another part of the fine-tuning argument is God leaves just enough of his options open for us to be free, but it's still not true that those things are actually existing. But the question of how much the probable could affect us, I think it comes down to, what do you think the relationship between base reality is and the belief and observation? An idealist like me thinks that they're very intertwined. I think information knows something, and then the physical world reacts depending on what you know. I think that is a pretty good argument, especially when we literally worship the logos and garnet.
right. Now, there's a question before I go too far. Under my name, I have the thing, dissentfromdarwin.com. So if you want to go in and find out about these 1,000 scientists across the globe that work in this field, find out what they have to say about evolution. One of the questions that a lot of atheists will ask is, why did God make the universe so big? Wasn't that a waste? Wasn't that a lot of waste out there in the universe? And the answer to that really is, if you're God and you have unlimited resources, you can do anything you want. There's things that have to, and he can make it as big or small as he wants. One of the things that a lot of people don't know, when the universe was started, there was no carbon in the universe itself, okay? And as you know, we are carbon-based individuals. Carbon did not start to come into the universe until stars would go supernova. And when they would go supernova, which took about 10 billion years.
There's 10 billion years from the beginning to when they started to supernova, or to build up enough carbon that
no,
like could
because
exist.
Supernova and explodes made. And the first stars did not go supernova and start to explode like that until about 10 billion years into the Big Bang. So all that carbon.
I thought it was 3 or 4. I didn't know it was 10.
Yeah, carbon started to float off through the universe itself, and it took a long time to get here to our planet. So, and that's this is another reason why I don't believe that we have ever been visited by UFOs, because the complexity in evolution outside of this planet, if it can't be proven here, it can't be proven that it exists and has happened in other places in our universe. I believe that
So,
we are alone.
see, I think that I don't think that logically follows. Just because there is an alien life elsewhere in the world does not mean that we aren't being visited by extraterrestrial intelligent life on our planet.
Okay, so you could argue the fact that angels live in a different dimension, and they are alien life to
They are
human beings.
extraterrestrial intelligent life forms that interact with us, and the Bible even records their interactions and some of the things that they do as a result. But yeah, I get your
Okay, let
point.
me let me rephrase that. And that's a really good point because I think in the final days we will have angels that will visit us, and human beings will feel that they're UFOs coming from outside our solar
Mhm.
system. And you're right. Um, but I was really referring to the fact that evolution did not occur outside of our in the rest of the universe that would produce other life, and that life would come to visit us. Okay, so good point, my grandson.
Yeah. Have you ever heard L.A. Marzulli, right? I'm sure from
Yeah.
around. L.A. Marzulli actually has a theory that the grays are the biological engineered bodies that were manufactured specifically so that way the Nephilim, or the demons really, the demons wouldn't have to fight for embodiment, and then therefore they made these bioengineered bodies that they could inhabit and use instead of actually having to manipulate and possess a human being. And so that's what he believed, that's his theory, his hypothesis on the on the grays, because there's been so many accounts of these gray aliens and independent attestation of their form and how their eyes would look, and also the feelings that people would get um, without even realizing that they were interacting with these beings. They would get the same feelings, and then once they had interactions, it's like their instincts would know that there's something wrong. Like, very interesting thing. And
Yeah,
before, and
he's the one that said our planet was populated with giants.
yes,
Uh,
he's got a I think it's either a series or a book, or sorry, a movie. I think it also might even be a documentary series called "And on the Trail of the Nephilim," and he is doing some really interesting archaeological work, going around and finding the body parts and the skulls and such of these large giants. And he's even had instances where he has found giant skeletons and had things confiscated by both either government or by museums and the like, and then they'll call back and be like, "Hey, so what's up with this?" And they'll act like they have no idea what he's talking about after they confiscated what they did. And so he has some interesting stories on that. That's his take on the whole UFO phenomenon, and he does a regular report on that, either every day or at least many times a week, where he talks about the recent sightings and the like. And they've been getting more and more brazen with the way that the sightings have been happening. There's been more and more.
and,
And
and
I
and
mean,
think about it, to get human beings ready for that. Look at all the science fiction movies that are out from
mhm,
UFOs and stuff like that.
mhm,
And a lot of people, even Christians, would look at what we're talking about like right now is it's fairy tales. Where would you come up with stuff like
yeah,
this? But if you go through the Old Testament, holy mackerel, there's a whole lot of stuff in there. Look
yeah,
at what David and Goliath was. Look how big Goliath was. This is
oh yeah,
a 10-foot, 9-foot individual, but he wasn't alone. There was a whole tribe of them.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, depending on your reading too, he could have been as tall as 13 feet. So I mean, it really does. I mean, we
but
don't take seriously the biblical account. Michael Heiser does a good job of defending why the Nephilim are something that we need to take more seriously. And
yeah,
here's on the Greys and on the alien thing. We'll leave it with this one fact that I heard from Chuck Missler and reiterated again by L.A. Marzulli and some of his work. And this is one of my favorite facts to share with people who are really into that the UFOs, and they're really into, that sort of world. They're not really interested in religion. This is my favorite fact to share with them, and that is that if you invoke the name of Jesus during an abduction, it has 100% efficacy rate of ending the abduction. And you can't just say Jesus. You can't just say Jesus like in terms of like, oh, Jesus Christ, or be like, Jesus. You have to invoke in terms of your relationship to him. Anyone. So if they're just like, Jesus saved me, Jesus helped me, Jesus Christ, please save me from this, or something like that. Some invocation of your relationship with Jesus. It 100% has always stopped every abduction that they have ever seen, that kind of occurrence. 100% efficacy rate. Nothing else does that. Nothing else ends it. But when you invoke
Like that,
Jesus,
right? Well, look at when Moses was going through with the people to the promised land, and he sent out 12 guys to go look at the promised land, and 10 of them came back and said, we can't go in there. These people are so huge, they make us look like grasshoppers.
Yep, they're grasshoppers on their side. And Caleb and Joshua, they're like, nah, we got this. God's on our side. Yep, and that's why Joshua and Caleb got to go in the promised land. Everyone else, they're just like, okay, the rest of y'all are dying here. That was the cinching moment too. That interaction, seeing the Nephilim there, is actually why they spent the 40 years in the desert, because up to that point, God had put up with them and dealing with their stiff-neckedness, the fact that they committed open idolatry. He had dealt with them and endured with them up until that point, and he was still leading them personally as a cloud of fire, or a pillar of clouds by day and a pillar of fire by night. He was still leading them, and when they didn't come back and give a good report, and they all started freaking out, he said, "That's it. I'm not leading you." So the original plan must have been that God Himself was going to, the angel of the Lord that was inside of that pillar, which we know is Jesus. Michael Heiser did his doctoral thesis on that, the two powers of heaven. The original plan was that Jesus was going to come in, and war for the people, but because they didn't want to go in that first time, he said, "Fine, I'm done with you people." And he actually told Moses that he was going to kill them all and restart with Moses. I guess the same way he did with Noah and Noah and Abraham and and the rest. But Moses, as a type of Christ, said, "No, no, no. If you take them, take me too. I'm going down with them. So if you're doing that,
here I am, take me."
so it's they would have not had to fight the Nephilim themselves. They wouldn't have had to do much of anything. God would have came in and taken care of it all himself, the same way he did with Pharaoh and his army. But because of their
right.
they died out in the desert. They had to wait a generation, and Joshua had to lead the people to actually war themselves, because God wasn't going to do their fights anymore. And it was all because they saw the Nephilim and they didn't trust God, because God needed these creatures, these half-breed creatures that were not even human and thus didn't have the image of God. He needed them off the face of the planet. Every major genocide is against Nephilim. The only exception I can think of was judgments against entire nations, like Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. So, but with that, I know we're coming up on our last minute.
Yeah, I was just we're at a minute and a half here. So what did you think we were going to talk about next month? You were bringing up the
hit. Talk about manuscript evidence. I can get. It'd be really fun to do some manuscript evidence and talking about the various composites of text that we can use, and how we know that the Bible is reliable, and what translations might be the best to use, given the source material that we use typically for translation.
Okay, so let's do that. The historicity of Scripture.
Yep.
Justin, it was very fascinating today. It was a great subject matter. Thank you, everybody who was here with us. Our next episode to Jaws Christ Talk will be aired in May, when Justin will be back here and we'll be talking on that subject. Thank you very much for being on our show today, Justin. And me and you, we're good going back and forth and talking about lots of things. So see you next month, Justin.
Bye-bye.